In a stunning display of strategic initiative, Ukraine has done the unthinkable. It has launched its own special military operation inside Russia last week, over 900 days after the latter began its military operation in Ukraine. The incursion occurred in Russia's Kursk region, and this is the first time that Russia has been invaded by another country since the Second World War. Now, Kursk is not far from Kharkiv Oblast, where Russia has been trying to make a military breakthrough since February 2024. You can look it up on the map as well. Now, it is rather incredible how Ukraine has managed to shock its much bigger adversary. The nation has, after all, been described by its allies as outgunned and outmanned and facing considerable difficulty rotating its tired brigades. But what's more shocking is that Russia, supposedly the world's second biggest military superpower, has been unable to fend off this attack. In fact, as per the latest estimates, Russia would be able to start a proper mechanized counteroffensive only by October this year. Now, in a while, I'll tell you about Russia's response to this invasion. But for now, the pace and depth of the Kursk invasion can be understood when compared to the Russian advance this year. So if you look at 2024, so ever since the year began, Russia has managed to capture about 1,300 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. By comparison, the Ukrainians claim to have taken more than 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory in just 1 week, and they are adding more settlements as days go by. The most obvious question to ask is, how did Ukraine manage to do this? At the outset, there are at least 3 dimensions to this incursion. Now, first is the diplomatic dimension. Fundamentally, this incursion is about getting more leverage for future negotiations. Now, Ukraine has dominated in the Black Sea region, but Russia has been leading in the land battle, even though the pace of this advancement has been rather sluggish. Even right now, the Russians are increasing pressure on the key town of Povrovsk in the eastern flank, which is an important logistics line for Ukraine. But coming back to Kursk, Ukraine has turned the tables with its unexpected incursion there. Now, Ukraine too has grabbed Russian land. And now it's Moscow's turn to appeal to the United Nations and issue statements on international law and UN Charter, etc. So what has happened is, now there is scope for a land-for-land negotiation where both countries will be equals in that sense. Now, in the best-case scenario, the Ukrainian side would try to use Kursk as a bargaining chip for Crimea, as Crimea has multiple utilities and advantages. It is not only Putin's prized strategic achievement from 2014, but also controls crucial maritime trade links with the Black Sea. However, a more realistic scenario would be to negotiate it for Kherson and Kharkiv regions. Now, additionally, if you look at the Donbas region, it doesn't appear to be a feasible quid pro quo either, because 900 days of fighting have destroyed most of its 2 parts, Donetsk and Lugansk. While a major portion of Lugansk has been captured by Russia, a large part of Donetsk has also fallen prey. Ever since the Russia-Ukraine war began in 2022, it is this region that has experienced one of the most painfully prolonged trench-style warfare from the First World War times. The current fighting is also happening in this region. Now, Ukraine on its part has been trying to make Crimea untenable for long. So ultimately, the Kursk invasion will be best utilized in strengthening Kyiv's position in the peninsula and the final negotiations. And that is what I meant when I said the land-for-land negotiations. It must also be noted that after the successful incursion of Kursk and a lack of a strong response from Russia, Ukraine could also make inroads into Belgorod, where similar offensive tactics have come to light lately. A few days ago, Ukraine made similar statements on Transnistria as well, which is a region in Moldova where Russia fans separatism. Now, second is the military aspect. And it is the military aspect of this incursion which truly boggles the mind. From what is visible in the geolocated footage, it can be seen that Ukraine launched this operation with primarily 2 types of armored infantry vehicles. Wheeled infantry combat vehicles, such as the United States-made Strykers, and tracked ICVs, infantry combat vehicles, such as the US-made M2 Bradleys and the German-made Marders. What was also striking was Germany's position, which so far has been wary of escalating the war and has consistently denied Taurus missiles to Ukraine. This time, though, the country officially expressed no objection to the Ukrainian side using the ICVs, the infantry combat vehicles, against Russia. Now, this change in Berlin's attitude complements the various statements made by French President Emmanuel Macron. If you remember, Macron has consistently argued that sending French troops on the ground is not ruled out. Poland already has been more hawkish on Russia. So, if the European powers blur the red lines of their assistance to Ukraine, the war is likely to enter a different period with tremendous kinetic warfare from both sides. But remember that at the same time, the German government has decided to halt any fresh military assistance to Ukraine after a year, which is 2025, and therefore the window to exploit this opportunity remains rather tight for Kyiv. Now, coming to another aspect of this military dimension that I'm discussing, Zelensky's special military operation in Kursk saw lightning success because Ukraine could exploit Russia's military planning vulnerabilities. Now, this remains a key lesson for military strategizing. I'll explain how. Moscow's first planning weakness becomes apparent while analyzing the role of Alexei Smirnov, the governor of Kursk. His warnings of increasing Ukrainian troops in the region were not really paid attention to by the Russian military authorities in time. And you may ask why. And simply because Russia could not believe that Ukraine could pull such a thing off. Next, Ukraine chose to attack the region that lay between the zones of two military task forces whose lines of responsibility didn't overlap. So the Ukrainians identified this gap and they stormed ahead. This once again shows a lack of preparedness and flexibility on the Russian side to deal with imminent attacks. Moscow perhaps became a victim of its own perception of Ukrainians as run down and the idea that Western support for the country is waning and it has red lines, etc. Coming to the third aspect of this invasion, I call it informational aspect. It is now becoming clearer that the Russian side started to pay the price of a sunk cost fallacy about its mismanaged war strategy, not just now, but actually from the beginning. Not only did it have an unclear picture of the Ukrainian side's preparedness, but it also seemed to have made mistakes in assessing how far the Ukrainians were willing to go. Similarly, it now seems to dawn upon analysts all over the world that Ukraine too has been slowly and steadily blurring the red lines. First, by launching an unthinkable invasion of Russian territory, and second, by proving repeatedly to its partners that the threat of Moscow's nuclear response is more saber-rattling than an actual risk. So, what about Russia's response then? Now, it is interesting to see that Russia has not given a fitting response to this invasion of their territory. On the one hand, Putin has invoked the UN Charter and international law and has also asked the UN to condemn this invasion. On the other, Moscow has refused to call it an invasion at all, which is typical Moscow style. According to latest updates, President Putin has ordered the Federal Security Service, the FSB, to step in, calling it a counter-terrorism operation. Now, this means two things. One, that the Russian side is obviously trying to downplay the gravity of the situation. And two, that Putin actually doesn't, and perhaps rightfully, doesn't trust his own MOT anymore. The inability to repel Ukraine's attack could also lead to the removal of General Valery Gerasimov, who remains the commander-in-chief of the special military operation in Ukraine ever since it started in February 2022. Now, what about Beijing, that has been exercising its charm offensive with Chinese characteristics? Let me explain how. One of the most surprising developments comes from Russia's friends with no limits, that is China. In its officially released statement on the Kursk invasion, Beijing has simply asked all sides to exercise restraint instead of upholding Russian territorial sovereignty or condemning Ukraine. But on the other hand, it is still supplying Moscow with dual-use technology and all the fiscal help. Now, it does seem to me that the Chinese wish to reassess the damage of this no-limits friendship on their economic ties with Europe, which is a far bigger economic partner to China than Russia. Again, in my opinion, the contours of China's intentions and the limits of its help remain unclear. The final verdict for now is that China cannot be trusted based on what it has said to either side. Finally, how to connect these dots with Prime Minister Modi's maiden trip to Ukraine? The most interesting angle to this entire episode is our Prime Minister's likely visit to Ukraine on 23rd of August. In a classic balancing act, India decided to visit Ukraine after the Modi-Putin summit in July could not yield favorable results for its reputation as a mediator. India's reputation as a mediator in the Russia-Ukraine war. If you remember, targeting of a children's hospital in Kyiv, just as PM Modi was embracing President Putin, became a controversial undoing in India's committed diplomatic and humanitarian efforts to bring the war to an end. Back then, Modi's visit to Ukraine, that decision was meant to highlight India's mediating prowess in what seemed like an endless war and bring the two sides to the negotiating table. It was a feat only a neutral player like India could have achieved. It has excellent ties with the West and has an enduring relationship with Russia. But the situation has changed radically in the weeks that have followed. Not only has Ukraine shocked Russia, but it has also flabbergasted the international community by showcasing its audacity. It has shown that it can conduct a secret operation even amid war fatigue, lack of soldiers, and shortage of weapons. So Modi's visit is more crucial now than ever. War dynamics show that both Russia and Ukraine are readying their best bet ahead of the negotiations that will likely occur if former US President Donald Trump makes a comeback. It is the perfect time for India to up its mediation game and explore investment opportunities in the reconstruction of Ukraine along with other European partners. New Delhi can indeed play a meaningful role in the rebuilding of Europe. How will India's diplomacy play out and what will PM Modi achieve through his visit to Kyiv? I'll be back to discuss that and more. Stay tuned.